Have you ever been humiliated just because you were poor? Nia, a 12-year-old girl from a small village, was publicly expelled by the school principal right in front of her entire class because she couldn't pay her tuition. No one said a word, not her teachers, not her friends. She walked away in silence, carrying nothing but shame and despair. But someone was watching. Zuberi, a quiet seamstress living on the edge of the village, saw it all. She didn't rush to comfort Nia. Instead, she went home, stayed up all night sewing a school uniform from scraps of cloth. At sunrise, she walked into that same school, paid the rest of Nia's tuition, and demanded the creation of a fund for underprivileged students. This story is inspired by real events in African villages, where education is a privilege and compassion is often the only lifeline for poor children. By the end of this video, you'll witness how a tattered uniform silenced an entire school hall and how a poor girl became the founder of a scholarship, awarded first to the very person who once mocked her. Nia didn't just return to school. She became top of her class. She wore a dress made from fabric scraps donated by every student, and when her biggest bully begged for help, she handed her a pair of scissors and said, "Every stitch is a chance to begin again." Don't scroll past. If you've ever felt like you had nothing to start with, this story will show you how even an old sewing machine can stitch a life back together. The fan creaked lazily above the crowded classroom, stirring the hot air that clung to every surface. Sweat slid down the back of Nia's neck as she bent over her notebook, her pencil moving carefully across the fragile page. The cover of the book was torn at the corner, edges softened from years of being carried in her small hands. She pressed her palm over it protectively, as if guarding something far more precious than paper and ink. Then came the heavy sound of shoes striking the wooden floor. The room went still. Heads turned toward the door as the principal's tall figure filled the frame. His presence pulled the light out of the room. Without a word, he motioned for Nia. Her name cut through the silence like a blade. "Stand up. Come to the front." Every pair of eyes followed her. She rose slowly, her knees stiff, her hands clutching the frayed notebook against her chest. The classroom seemed longer than usual as she walked, the whispers already beginning to slither between the desks. She stood before him, her breath shallow, the sunlight from the window spotlighting the dust around her face. The principal's gaze was cold, stripped of any kindness. His voice carried across the room, stern and sharp. "You will not return here. Your family has failed to pay. From today, you are dismissed." The word struck harder than any slap. A ripple of sound followed, some gasps, some giggles hidden behind palms. A boy in the back snorted. Another girl leaned in to whisper in her friend's ear. But no one stepped forward. Her friends, those who had once shared their pencils with her, played beside her under the tree, looked down at their desks, refusing her eyes. The silence was not empty. It was heavy with rejection. Nia clung tighter to her notebook. It smelled faintly of charcoal and old paper, her only shield against the flood of humiliation. Her throat burned. She waited, longing for someone, anyone, to say this was wrong. Surely her teacher, the one who had praised her neat handwriting, would speak up. She searched his face, eyes pleading, but he avoided her gaze. He turned to the principal's ledger and, without hesitation, signed the line that sealed her dismissal. It was a betrayal she had not prepared for. The man she believed would defend her erased her name as easily as brushing dust off his sleeve. Something cracked inside her chest, sharp and raw. The betrayal cut deeper than the principal's decree. The room blurred as her tears pressed forward. She bit her lip, forcing herself not to let them fall here, not in front of the laughter, not in front of those who already believed she was less. She bowed her head, nodded stiffly, and gripped the notebook until her knuckles turned white. Her feet felt heavy as she turned away, the floor echoing each step. Behind her, the class remained silent, as though her erasure was a scene they were forbidden to interrupt. Outside, the midday sun blazed down. The gate of the school, usually alive with voices and footsteps, now stood like the mouth of exile. She walked through it, the iron bars groaning faintly as they closed behind her. Beyond, the world opened wide and merciless. Heat shimmered on the dusty road, burning the air until it wavered. She could no longer hold back the tears. They spilled freely, sliding hot down her cheeks, dripping onto the cover of the notebook she pressed against her chest. Each step away from the gate was heavier than the last, her sobs breaking into the stillness of the afternoon. The notebook shook with her trembling hands, its worn spine digging into her ribs, as though reminding her she still had something left. She did not know what waited beyond the dust, only that she was walking away from the place she once believed would save her. The road stretched endlessly before her, empty and blinding, while behind her the voices of her classmates rose again, muffled but unkind. And so she moved forward, small and alone, her shadow stretched thin across the ground. The sun bore down mercilessly, yet she kept her arms wrapped tight around that torn book. Her tears mixed with the sweat on her face, salt on her lips. She did not look back. She did not dare. The world had turned its face from her, and she stepped into the brightness with nothing but a broken notebook and the echo of silence where kindness should have been. Would anyone ever see her again? Or had she been erased, not only from the classroom, but from the very future she had dreamed of? The rain had come suddenly, rushing across the village like a sheet of silver knives. Under the old tree at the edge of the square, Nia sat curled against its roots, her thin arms clutching her notebook. Drops fell through the leaves and ran down her face, blurring with the tears she had not yet stopped. Her dress clung to her body, heavy with mud at the hem. Passers-by hurried past, shielding themselves with baskets, ignoring the small figure beneath the tree as if she were invisible. But someone was watching. Across the lane, a woman stood still in the shadow of her doorway. Her eyes, dark and weary, rested on the trembling girl under the storm. The woman was Zuberi, the seamstress, who lived at the farthest end of the village. She had long grown used to being on the margins, hearing the laughter from markets but never invited in. Now she felt something stir inside her as she saw the child shivering alone, like a scrap of cloth tossed aside. She did not step forward. She only watched, her hand gripping the frame of her door as the wind howled around her. The sight pulled her back to her own past. Once she, too, had been a child standing at a gate, dismissed not with words but with silence. That memory pressed on her chest like an old bruise. She closed her eyes, listening to the drum of rain. The faint sound of the girl's sobs carried through it. When the rain eased to a mist, Nia rose, her notebook still pressed against her heart. She walked slowly down the lane, leaving wet footprints on the earth. Zuberi's gaze followed her until the girl disappeared beyond the bend. Only then did the seamstress step inside her narrow house, shutting the door against the damp night. The small room smelled of cloth and oil. Spools of thread lay scattered across a wooden table, their colors dulled in the dim light. Against the wall sat an old chest, its corners scarred by years of use. Zuberi knelt before it. The lid creaked as she lifted it, releasing the faint scent of cedar and dust. Inside lay folded scraps of fabric, carefully saved, and beneath them a small cloth pouch heavy with coins. Each coin had been earned by mending torn hems, patching shirts, fixing seams for those who barely noticed her. Her fingers lingered on the pouch. It was all she had managed to gather in years of labor. She counted them slowly, the clink of metal echoing in the quiet room. The sound was both comforting and cruel, reminding her of how little it was. Yet as she thought of the girl under the tree, shoulders shaking in the rain, she knew these coins were no longer hers to keep. Her hand moved to the machine in the corner. The iron frame was rusted, the wheel stiff, but it still worked. She pressed her foot against the pedal, and the wheel groaned awake. The needle rose and fell, piercing cloth with a steady rhythm. The room filled with the hum of effort, a low, insistent song. She spread the scraps of fabric before her. None were whole. Some were frayed, some too small, some faded by sun. Alone, they were useless. Together, perhaps they could become something. She cut carefully, her scissors slicing through the silence. Each snip echoed like a promise. Her hands, though calloused and marked by years, moved with precision, joining one piece to another, aligning edges where no one else would bother. Outside, the rain thickened again, drumming on the roof. The sound blended with the machine's steady pulse. The candlelight flickered over her face, catching the lines carved deep into her skin. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her work was her voice. Hours passed. The scraps became shapes. The shapes became patterns. The cloth grew beneath her fingers, patch by patch, like a story stitched from loss and resilience. She leaned close, her breath fogging the glass of her spectacles. The needle pricked her finger once, drawing a bead of blood that stained the corner of the cloth. She pressed it quickly, but did not stop. The fabric took the form of a uniform, a school dress, simple but whole. Its seams were strong, its colors mismatched yet strangely beautiful, like a mosaic of all the forgotten pieces. She held it up, shaking out the folds. It was imperfect, but it was enough. Her chest tightened as she remembered the girl's tears, the way she had hidden her face in the rain. She folded the uniform gently and set it aside. Then she opened the pouch again, poured the coins into her palm. The weight of them felt heavier than ever. She placed them into a small bag, tying it firmly. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The machine was silent now, but its hum still lingered in her ears. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly, as if the sky itself was restless, and yet she did not feel restless. She felt a quiet resolve settle over her, heavy and unshakable. She had not spoken to the girl, had not offered a single word. Words were fragile, easily lost in the wind. Action was stronger. Tomorrow, she would act. She looked around her small house, the uneven floorboards, the cracked walls, the shelves lined with folded cloth. It had always felt too empty, too quiet. Tonight, for the first time, it felt like a place where something new could begin. She pressed her hand against the folded uniform, the fabric still warm from the iron. Her eyes softened. It was not just a dress. It was an answer to silence. It was proof that a child cast out could still be welcomed in, not with pity, but with dignity. The night deepened. The storm had nearly passed. Drops still clung to the eaves, falling in slow rhythm, each one a gentle tap against the earth. Zuberi sat beside her machine, her back against the wall, her eyelids heavy. Yet she could not bring herself to sleep. She listened to the lingering rain, to the quiet of her own breath, to the faint creak of the roof above. The coins and the uniform lay side by side on the table, waiting. The room smelled of fabric warmed by candlelight, of iron and oil, of determination. Outside, the village lay dark, windows shuttered, doors barred. But within this small house something had been set in motion. The scraps of cloth, the chink of coins, the steady hum of the machine, all were threads weaving toward a morning that would not be the same as the night. And when the candle finally burned down to its stub, the seamstress reached out, touched the dress one last time, and whispered to the silence, as though it were listening, "Tomorrow, the girl will know she was not forgotten." Morning light poured through the narrow windows of the school office, slicing the room into harsh bars of gold and shadow. The wooden shutters rattled in the wind, and the air smelled faintly of chalk, ink, and the bitter tang of authority. The door opened with a slow groan, and Zuberi stepped inside. Her steps were measured, her shoulders straight, her face calm as stone. In her hand she carried a folded dress, blue stitched with care, and a small cloth pouch that clinked softly with every movement. The principal, Kwame, sat behind a broad desk, his figure framed by shelves heavy with ledgers and certificates. His thick fingers drummed against the polished wood as he looked up, startled by her presence. Few ever dared walk into his office without invitation, and certainly not the seamstress, who lived at the edge of the village. His eyes narrowed, his mouth tightening. "What business brings you here?" His voice was low, edged with irritation. Zuberi set the pouch gently on the desk. The coins inside gave a muted sound, sharp in the stillness. She then laid the folded uniform beside it, smoothing the cloth with her hand. "This covers the remainder of her tuition for this term," she said. Her voice was even, unshaken, though her chest rose and fell faster than she let show. "And this is her uniform. She will return to class." Kwame leaned back, his chair creaking. He studied the pouch as if it were an insult rather than an offering. He picked it up, weighed it in his hand, then let it fall with a dull thud. Charity has its limits. If a family cannot provide for their own, perhaps the child does not belong here. Zuberi's gaze held his, unwavering. Then perhaps it is the school that has forgotten its purpose. A silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. The secretary in the corner shifted in his chair but said nothing. Two teachers who had been reviewing papers near the window froze mid-motion. Their eyes darted from Kwame to the seamstress, unsure whether to admire her courage or recoil from it. Kwame's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to defiance, least of all from someone of no standing. "You presume much, Zuberi," he said, his tone clipped. Her reply came quietly, almost tenderly, though it carried the weight of steel. "I presume only that every child deserves a chance to learn. You may accept these coins, or you may refuse and bear the shame of turning your back not just on her, but on what this place was built to mean." For a long moment he said nothing. His fingers brushed the edge of the desk, tapping once, then again. His eyes flickered to the uniform. It seems neat, despite the mismatched fabric. The candlelight caught the faint patches of different blues, a testament to how it had been pieced together from scraps. Something about its honesty unsettled him. He leaned back further, folding his arms. You speak boldly for one who mends other people's cast-offs, he muttered. And yet it is from cast-offs that we build what lasts, she answered. His face hardened, but he did not move the pouch from where it sat. The secretary cleared his throat softly, as if to break the tension, then buried himself again in his ledger. The teachers pretended to read, their pens unmoving. The room seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Kwame looked away. His voice was quiet, but grudging. Let her come back. It was not an admission of defeat, only a concession, but it was enough. Zuberi inclined her head once, gathered nothing, and turned to leave. Her steps were as steady as when she had entered, but her heart beat with a fierceness she had not felt in years. Outside, the courtyard shimmered in the sunlight. The children were filing into their classrooms, their chatter carrying across the air. Among them stood Naya, her face drawn, her eyes still swollen from yesterday's humiliation. She clutched her notebook, uncertain whether she belonged. Zuberi approached and handed her the uniform. Nia's fingers trembled as she unfolded it, her breath catching at the sight. It was not new, not perfect, but it was hers. She pressed it against her chest, the stitches rough beneath her fingertips, the scent of fabric and candle smoke clinging to it. Her throat closed, and she could not speak. Go on, Zuberi murmured, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The bell rang, sharp and metallic. Children rushed into lines, laughter echoing. Nia stood still, the uniform heavy in her arms. Then she slipped it on quickly over her worn dress. The fabric was cool against her skin, the seams stiff at first, but softening as she moved. She took a breath, straightened her back, and stepped toward the classroom. The chatter quieted as she entered. Every head turned. Some eyes widened in surprise, others narrowed in disdain. A ripple of whispers passed through the room. She felt them cut at her, but she did not stop. She held her notebook tightly, lifted her chin just enough to keep from breaking. At the front, her teacher looked up. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Guilt, perhaps. But he said nothing. The space where her name had been erased from the ledger yesterday now seemed to hang between them, invisible but undeniable. Nia moved to her seat, each step ringing louder in her ears than the shuffle of dozens of others. She sat, placed her notebook on the desk, and folded her hands. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the room could hear it, yet she did not cry, not this time. The uniform scratched at her skin, but beneath the discomfort was warmth, an armor stitched from scraps. She caught the faintest scent of lavender oil clinging to the thread, a detail only she would notice. And with it came the memory of last night's storm, the sound of rain mingling with the hum of a machine working long into darkness. Her classmates shifted in their chairs. Some exchanged looks, mouths twitching with suppressed laughter. One girl muttered under her breath, and another boy smirked. But there was also a silence, an uneasy acknowledgement that something had shifted. The seamstress had walked into the lion's den and walked out unbroken. The girl they had watched fall yesterday had returned, wrapped in the proof of someone's unyielding belief. The lesson began. Words filled the air, chalk scraped against the board. Nia copied them carefully, her hand steady, though her stomach still knotted. Each stroke of her pencil felt like defiance, each page a statement. I am still here. And though she could not know it yet, her return in that patchwork uniform would ripple outward, carried in whispers beyond these walls, unsettling the certainty of those who believed silence was stronger than courage. The classroom clock ticked. The air grew heavy again, the afternoon sun pressing hard against the windows. Sweat gathered on her brow, but she did not wipe it. She let it fall, line by line, like the tears she refused to shed. At the back of the room, a boy snickered, but his voice faded quickly when the teacher glanced up. Around her, the air buzzed with unspoken things. Some eyes mocked, some judged, and a few, just a few, watched her with quiet wonder. She felt them all, and though her hands still shook, her steps from the gate to her seat had already changed her. She no longer carried only shame. She carried the weight of someone else's faith stitched into every seam of the dress she wore. The bell rang again, and the children spilled out into the courtyard. Nia lingered, her hand brushing the edge of her desk, grounding herself. Outside, voices rose, teasing and curious. She walked slowly, her breath measured, the sun flashing against her eyes. And as she crossed the threshold once more, she felt the world watching, not with kindness, not yet, but with the first tremors of recognition that she had not been erased. Her steps were fragile but firm. The shadow of yesterday's tears still clung to her, yet beneath it pulsed the faint glow of something harder to extinguish. Resolve. The road ahead remained steep, lined with whispers and ridicule, but she carried with her a uniform cut from scraps, a pouch of coins laid down in defiance, and the silent vow of a seamstress who had dared to stand against silence itself. The question that now lingered, heavy and unanswered, was whether the strength lent to her would be enough to withstand what was still to come. The blades of the scissors flashed in the afternoon light, slicing through cloth with a sound sharp as broken glass. Threads scattered across the table, rolling like tiny veins of color into the cracks of the wooden floor. The hum of the old sewing machine filled the cramped room, steady, relentless, like a heartbeat that refused to falter. Nia sat hunched over her work, her hands clumsy with the fabric, her brow damp with sweat. She held her breath as she tried to align the edges of two scraps, her fingers stiff, trembling with the pressure of getting it right. The seam went crooked. Zuberi's voice came quietly from across the table, steady but firm. Undo it. Nia stared at the stitch, uneven and messy, ruining the flow of the cloth. Her shoulders sagged. She had spent what felt like hours on this single piece, and now it was all for nothing. But, she began, Zuberi's gaze cut across to her, not unkind but unyielding. Undo it. The girl bit her lip hard. She pulled at the thread, tugging it free until the cloth lay bare again. The fibers looked frayed, vulnerable. She wanted to slam her fist against the table, to throw the scrap aside, to scream that it wasn't fair. Instead, she swallowed it down, her throat tight, and began again. The scissors glinted, the needle pricked, the machine thrummed on. The small room was alive with sound. The air smelled of oil and dust, of fabric warmed under the iron. Every surface was crowded. Spools of thread stacked in uneven towers, chalk marks scrawled across cloth, patterns pinned and repinned until the paper grew soft. Sunlight broke through the small window, painting lines across the walls, catching the floating dust so it glittered like ash suspended in air. Nia's fingers slipped again. The fabric puckered, the seam pulling out of line. Her jaw clenched, her chest heaving with the frustration. She felt her eyes sting, hot and humiliating. She wanted to scream that she couldn't do it, that her hands weren't made for this, that she was tired of always failing. She jerked back from the table, nearly toppling the stool. The scrap of cloth slid to the floor. Her hand hovered above it, ready to crush it into a ball and throw it across the room. Before she could, Zuberi's hand reached out, not fast, not harsh, gentle, steady, pressing lightly against Nia's wrist. The old woman bent, lifted the scrap herself, smoothed it carefully with her palm. She said nothing at first. She only threaded the needle again, guiding it through with quiet patience. Then she placed the cloth back before Nia. "Try again. I'm no good at this," Nia whispered, the words trembling out before she could stop them. Her throat burned. "Then fail again," Zuberi said softly, "until your failure looks like skill." The words sank into the air like stones dropped into water. Nia stared at her, caught between anger and awe. The woman's face was pale with fatigue, a cough rattling faintly in her chest. Her hands shook almost imperceptibly as she held the scissors, yet her movements were precise, unwavering. She guided the girl's fingers back to the fabric, pressed them into place. The machine hummed again. Together their hands moved, the old guiding the young, the rough guiding the fragile. Slowly the seam grew straight. The cloth, once twisted and ruined, began to smooth beneath the pressure of their work. Nia's breathing steadied. She pushed the pedal, felt the machine answer, its rhythm merging with the pulse in her veins. She didn't notice at first, but her shoulders had eased, her jaw unclenched. She was making something. Not perfect, not easy, but real. The moment carried her, until the machine clattered, the thread snapped, and silence returned. She sat frozen, staring at the broken line. Her first thought was despair, but then, almost without realizing, she reached for the spool, re-threaded the needle, set it back in place. Her hands were slower this time, more deliberate. She began again. Zuberi watched quietly, her eyes soft. She coughed once, the sound harsh, her body trembling with it, but she waved off the concern. She rested her hand against the table, her breath shallow, her voice low but sure. "Mistakes are not the end. They are the doorway." The words lingered in the air long after the machine resumed its hum. Hours slipped away in the rhythm of their work. The sun dropped lower, shadows stretching across the room. The glow of the lamp grew stronger, bathing the scraps of cloth in warm light. The sounds became a kind of music, scissors slicing, thread pulling, the sharp clink of pins dropped into a tin. And then, without warning, Nia's needle stuck fast. She pulled too hard, and the fabric tore with a jagged rip. The sound split the silence, brutal, final. She froze, staring at the ruined cloth, her throat closing in panic. For a heartbeat, she waited for the scolding, for the anger, for the disappointment. Instead, Zuberi leaned close, lifted the torn piece, and showed her the edges. "Now," she said, her voice calm, "we learn to mend a wound." She threaded a heavier needle, guided it through the torn gap. Each stitch bound the cloth back together, stronger than it had been before. She placed the needle in Nia's hand. "Your turn." The girl's heart pounded as she tried, fumbling at first, but the rhythm came, slow, sure. When she tied off the thread and looked at the seam, she realized it was sturdy, holding where it had once been broken. Her chest swelled, tears pressing at her eyes, but not from failure this time, from something deeper, something like hope. She blinked them away, her vision shimmering. She looked at Zuberi then, really looked. The woman's face was pale, her lips pressed tight to hide the weariness. Her cough returned, rougher this time, shaking her frame. She turned away quickly, but not quickly enough. Nia saw it, the trembling of her hands, the weakness beneath the steady exterior. The girl opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She wanted to ask if she was all right, wanted to say she had noticed, but the woman only gave a small nod, urging her back to the cloth. Keep sewing. So she did. Her stitches grew straighter. Her mistakes grew fewer. Each correction felt less like punishment and more like learning to breathe again. The evening deepened. Outside, the night chorus began. Crickets, the faraway bark of a dog, the occasional shuffle of footsteps on the road. Inside, the hum of the machine became softer, slower, until it finally ceased. Nia sat with the finished piece in her lap, her eyes wide with exhaustion and wonder. Her fingers traced the seams she had made, crooked but whole. She felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting. She turned to thank Zuberi, but the woman was leaning against the wall, her hand pressed to her chest, her breath shallow. For an instant, fear clutched at the girl's heart. But then Zuberi smiled, faint but real, and said, "You see, nothing is ever wasted, not even the broken parts." The words wrapped around Nia like a blanket, soothing and heavy. She pressed the cloth against her chest, her tears slipping free at last. In that moment, she understood. This was not only about sewing. It was about her, about every wound she carried, every scar left from silence and shame. They, too, could be stitched, made stronger where they had torn. She bent her head, the fabric damp against her face. The room smelled of thread, of oil, of smoke from the lamp. The sounds of the night pressed against the thin walls, and for the first time since the gates of the school had closed behind her, she let herself cry openly. Not from defeat, but from the fragile, overwhelming knowledge that she was being taught not just how to stitch fabric, but how to stitch herself back together. The machine stood silent beside them, its wheels still warm, its metal gleaming faintly in the lamplight. The unfinished scraps lay scattered, waiting. The question that now echoed through her heart was whether she could carry this lesson outside the small room, into a world that tore far more cruelly than cloth. The courtyard rang with laughter that cut like blades. A circle of students had gathered near the steps, their bright clothes catching the midday sun. At the center stood Amara, her chin lifted, her hair tied in silk ribbons that shimmered with wealth. She pointed at Nia, her voice rising clear and cruel. "Look at her, wearing scraps like she's someone important. What's the point of studying? You'll always be nothing." The words hit harder than the laughter that followed. Nia stood at the edge of the circle, clutching her books close, her throat tight. She kept her eyes low, fighting to hold her face still. Her stomach twisted, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, as if the dust itself wanted to swallow her. She did not speak. She let the silence cover her like armor, though it weighed heavy. Her ears burned as the jeers grew louder. A girl whispered, "Beggar's daughter," and another chimed in, "She'll sew buttons the rest of her life." The words stung like wasps, leaving invisible welts. But inside something else stirred. She remembered the scraps of fabric Zuberi had forced her to sew and re-sew until her fingers bled. She remembered the lesson of undoing mistakes, of starting again. Her silence now was not surrender. It was the gathering of breath before a flame. The months that followed passed in the rhythm of hard work. At dawn, she swept the floor of the seamstress's workshop, the broom scratching against the boards. She lit the lamp when dusk fell, her eyes stinging with smoke as she stitched seams late into the night. Her hands grew tougher, her stitches cleaner, and all the while, between the hum of the machine and the sigh of the wind outside, she studied. By candlelight, she bent over her notebooks, her lips moving silently as she read and reread, each word pressed deep into her memory. Zuberi hovered nearby, her cough breaking the stillness now and then, but her gaze was steady. She rarely praised, but she always watched, always corrected. Again, she would say when Nia faltered over arithmetic. Once more, when the grammar slipped. It was exhausting, relentless. And yet it gave Nia something she had never had before, the proof that her mind could grow sharper than the ridicule that surrounded her. As the examinations approached, tension swept through the school like dry wind before a storm. Desks filled with anxious scribbles, lips whispered prayers, eyes darted across the room in nervous hope. Everyone believed Amara would rise above all. She always had. She had tutors, she had time, she had every advantage that money could buy. But Nia studied until her eyes burned red. She filled page after page, her handwriting cramped and uneven, her head heavy with sleepless nights. In the silence of Zuberi's workshop, she whispered formulas, copied passages, recited dates, her voice hoarse but steady. She could still hear the echo of Amara's laughter in her head, sharp and mocking. Each time it returned, she pressed her pencil harder to the page, refusing to let the memory break her. The day of the examination arrived. The air was heavy, thick with sweat and anticipation. The classroom smelled of dust, ink, and fear. Nia sat at her desk, her palms damp, her heart hammering. Papers rustled, pens scratched. The only sound louder was the blood rushing in her ears. Questions filled the page. Some she knew, some she wrestled with until her head spun. She bit her lip until it bled, forcing herself not to give up. The minutes slipped by, each one a thief stealing her chance. Yet she pressed on, word by word, answer by answer, until her paper was full. When it was over, the children spilled out into the courtyard, voices buzzing. Amara walked tall, her smile smug, already soaking in the admiration of her friends. Nia walked past them, her body numb, clutching her satchel. She had given everything she had. Whether it was enough was no longer in her hands. The results came days later. The courtyard swelled with noise as students crowded around the notice board. Dust rose as feet shuffled, elbows pushed, eyes strained. Names and numbers glared back from the paper pinned to the wood. Nia hesitated at the edge, her pulse loud in her ears. She stepped closer, weaving through the press of bodies. The letters blurred for a moment, then sharpened. Her eyes caught her name. Beside it, the number, the highest in the class. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she thought she had read it wrong. But it was there, undeniable. She had outscored them all, even Amara, especially Amara. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Nia?" someone whispered. "It can't be." Amara shoved her way forward, her eyes scanning the board. When she found the name, her face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The silence that fell was heavier than any insult she had ever thrown. Nia stood still, her hands trembling. Slowly, she lifted her head. For the first time, she let her eyes meet those around her. The mockery had vanished. In its place was shock, disbelief, something almost like respect, but edged with fear. Her heart swelled, not with pride, but with the fierce relief of survival. She had not only endured, she had triumphed. Amara's eyes burned with fury, but Nia no longer looked away. Her voice did not rise, but her presence spoke louder than any taunt. She straightened her back, the sun catching her face, her eyes bright, and in that moment, as the courtyard held its breath, The girl once cast out stood taller than them all, but the silence that followed was not gentle. It carried with it a question, heavy and dangerous. If she had proven them wrong once, how far would she go next? And how far would they go to stop her? The hall was overflowing, the air alive with heat and voices. Wooden beams groaned above, strings of faded banners fluttered in the draft. Parents lined the walls, fanning themselves with folded papers. The students, rows upon rows in mismatched uniforms, sat rigid on benches polished by countless restless hands. The stage at the front shone under lantern light, its wooden floor waxed until it reflected shadows. At the center, a podium stood waiting. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, the microphone squealing before it settled. His voice rose above the crowd. This year's highest honor, the one who has proven that perseverance outshines privilege, is awarded to— His paws stretched, filling the hall with expectant silence. Nia. Her name burst into the air like a spark in dry grass. Applause erupted thunderous, filling the hall. For an instant the world seemed to blur. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. Her feet felt heavy as stone, yet they carried her forward, each step echoing across the boards. She climbed the stage, the lanterns glaring against her eyes, the applause pressing like waves against her chest. She reached the podium. A certificate lay waiting, her name written in careful ink. A medal gleamed in the hands of the principal himself, his face forced into a tight smile. He hung it around her neck, the cold weight of it settling against her chest. She looked out across the sea of faces, dizzy with the sudden rise, the disbelief that this moment belonged to her. Then a voice shattered the applause.
"She doesn't deserve it."
The words cracked through the hall like lightning. Amara was on her feet, her face twisted with rage. She's poor. She's wearing rags stitched from trash. How can someone like her be worthy of honor? The applause faltered. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, like the shifting of dry leaves. All eyes turned back to Nia, waiting to see if the accusation would break her. The spotlight seemed to sear her skin. Her throat tightened, her mind blank for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her hands. She touched the fabric of her dress, the one sewn from scraps, patched with threads of many colors. She drew in a breath and stepped closer to the microphone. Her voice, though trembling at first, cut through the silence. This dress is made from the pieces left behind by others, the fabric you threw away, the cloth you no longer wanted. It was stitched by the same hands that mend your uniforms, patch your hems, fix your sleeves. If I am not worthy to wear it here, then neither are you worthy to wear the clothes that came from those same hands. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother in the audience looked down at her daughter's carefully mended skirt. A boy touched the patched elbow of his shirt. Teachers shifted uneasily. For the first time, the seamstress's work was no longer invisible. Amara's lips parted in fury, but no sound came. She looked around, searching for allies, but found only bowed heads and fidgeting hands. The silence that met her was louder than her shout. Nia stood straighter, her voice gaining strength. This is not about wealth. It is not about shame. It is about what we choose to value. If a dress sewn from scraps is unworthy, then so is every stitch that holds your world together. But if it can stand here, then so can I. And so can every child who has been told they are less. The hall held its breath. The banners trembled in the draft, their shadows swaying on the walls. A hush swept across the room, deep and heavy. The principal's hand twitched at his side. His face was unreadable, caught between pride and resentment. Teachers exchanged glances, their silence both cowardly and complicit. Parents shifted in their seats, uneasy with the truth laid bare. Nia's eyes swept the room. No child should be sent away for not having coins in their pocket. We need a fund, a scholarship, for those who cannot pay, not as charity, but as justice, so that no one else stands at the gate the way I once did. Her words rang out strong now, anchored by the memory of that blazing sun when she was cast from the school. The crowd remained frozen, caught between awe and shame. The metal at her chest seemed heavier, not with metal, but with meaning. Then came the stillness. The applause did not return. The air was thick, suffocating. No one moved. The spotlight above flickered once, then steadied. Its beam fell fully on Nia, illuminating the patchwork dress until it glowed. The threads caught the light, each seam a visible scar turned into beauty. She stood tall, her chin raised, the silence itself bending around her. In the front row, a child shifted uncomfortably, then slowly, awkwardly, began to clap. The sound echoed, thin but defiant. Another joined, then another. The applause grew, hesitant, stumbling, then stronger, until it filled the hall once more. But it was not the same as before. It was heavier, thoughtful, uncertain. It was not celebration, but reckoning. Amara sat down, her face pale, her eyes burning holes into the floor. The ceremony continued, but nothing could erase what had been spoken. The hall would carry her words long after the lanterns dimmed. And yet, as Nia stepped down from the stage, the weight of the silence lingered more than the applause. The crowd's approval was fragile, conditional, fleeting. She could feel it in the way eyes slid away from hers, in the unease that clung to the air. She had cracked something open, but whether it would hold or collapse, she did not know. The metal rested against her chest, cool and heavy. The dress it touched bore every seam, every patch, every scar. She felt them all. As the hall emptied, lanterns extinguished one by one. The echoes of her words hung like smoke in the rafters. She had dared to speak, dared to demand. And now, in the heavy quiet, a question pressed in from all sides. Would the world listen, or would it turn its face from her once more? The front door swung open, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed against the narrow walls. Nia burst into the workshop, her medal still hanging around her neck, her face alight with triumph. She carried the glow of the hall with her, the applause still ringing in her ears, the memory of standing tall under the spotlight fresh in her mind. "Zuberi," she called, her voice full of breathless joy. "We did it! But the words died in her throat. The old woman was on the floor, her body crumpled at the threshold of the sewing machine. One hand stretched forward, fingers grazing the wheel as though reaching for it even as strength failed her. Her chest rose in shallow bursts, her lips pale, her eyes half closed but still trying to focus. The metal clinked faintly as it struck Nia's chest when she dropped to her knees. "Zuberi!" her cry cracked in the small room. She slid her arms beneath the frail frame, feeling the unnatural weight of someone who had wasted away slowly, unnoticed until now. The air was thick with the smell of oil and cloth dust, but beneath it lingered the metallic tang of sickness. Zuberi stirred, her breath ragged. She pressed her trembling hand against the wooden frame of the sewing machine, as though anchoring herself to it. Her voice rasped, broken but insistent. This is yours now." Nia shook her head violently, tears spilling. No, don't say that. You're not leaving. I need you." The woman gave the faintest of smiles, lines deepening around her mouth. She coughed, the sound tearing through the room like fabric ripped apart. "I've been leaving. For a while. You just didn't see." The word struck like cold water. Images flashed in Nia's mind. The way Zuberi's hands sometimes trembled when holding scissors. The hollow cough that interrupted lessons. The shadows under her eyes she had dismissed as tiredness. She had seen them all, but she had not wanted to name them. Nia clutched her hand tighter, desperate to hold back what was slipping away. "Then let me do something. Let me help." But Zuberi only shook her head. "You already have." Her gaze drifted to the sewing machine, the iron wheel still warm from her last effort. "This isn't just wood and steel. It is voice, memory, witness. Every seam you sew will carry us both." The words trembled in the air, fragile but unbreakable. Nia swallowed, her vision blurring with tears. She wanted to argue, to rage against it, but her throat closed, and all that came out was a choked sob. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that flickered as if straining to stay alive. Shadows moved across the walls, long and wavering. Nia's tears fell onto the wooden floor, dark spots spreading slowly. She could hear her own heartbeat, frantic and heavy, against the weak, slowing breaths beside her. Zuberi's hand slipped from hers and landed softly against the sewing machine, her fingers curling against the wheel one last time. A whisper escaped her lips, barely audible. "Don't stop." And then the room fell silent. The sewing machine, always alive with sound, stood still. Its quietness was deafening, a void that filled every corner of the house. The rhythm that had guided Nia for so long was gone, leaving only the hollow echo of her own sobs. She clung to the machine, pressing her cheek against the cold iron, as if by sheer closeness she could revive the hum that had been the heartbeat of this place. The metal pressed painfully into her chest, a cruel reminder of a victory she could no longer share. The air grew heavier, pressing down until she could hardly breathe. Her tears fell freely, her body trembling with the force of grief. She felt small again, like the day she had walked away from the school gate with nothing but her torn notebook. Only this time there was no hand waiting in the shadows to guide her back. Outside, the night carried on as though nothing had changed. Crickets sang. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a neighbor shut a door. The world moved, unbothered. Inside, Nia sat in a silence that screamed. Her hand slid over the sewing machine, gripping the wheel. It was cold now, lifeless, but she clung to it as though it could still answer. She whispered through her tears, her voice breaking. "I won't stop. I promise." The lamp flickered once more and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Only the outline of the machine remained, black against black, like a monument. And there, in the suffocating dark, Nia realized the truth that cut sharper than any cruelty she had endured before. The hands that had steadied her were gone. What remained was the burden of carrying their work forward, alone. The question pressed into her heart with unbearable weight. Could she keep the vow, or would the silence consume her too? The hammering of nails echoed in the morning air, sharp against the hush of gathered voices. A wooden signboard swung gently from new ropes, its letters burned deep into the grain. The Needle Fund, a place for every girl who dreams to learn. Beneath it, the door of Zuberi's old workshop stood wide open. The one-shadowed space was bright now, sunlight flooding across rows of tables, scissors gleaming, spools of thread stacked high like pillars of color. Girls filled the room, their laughter spilling into the street. Some clutched scraps of fabric to their chests, others leaned close to watch needles flash in the light. The air vibrated with the rhythm of machines, their wheels turning in harmony, a sound like a chorus resurrected from silence. At the threshold stood Nia, taller now, her hair bound back neatly, her gaze steady. She wore no medal, no ribbon, only a plain blue dress stitched carefully, the seams straight and sure. But when she placed her hand on the frame of the doorway, it carried a gravity greater than ceremony. Behind her, villagers who once whispered stood in quiet respect, their eyes drawn not just to the building, but to what it meant. The principal Kwame approached slowly, his gait heavy with the weight of years. His presence drew murmurs, though none dared speak aloud. He paused at the door, cleared his throat, and addressed the gathering. "Mistakes," he said, his voice rough, "cannot be undone with silence. Today we begin again." He lifted a folded paper, his hands trembling slightly. "On behalf of the school, I declare a permanent scholarship fund for those whose families cannot pay, so no child will be turned away again." A hush swept through the crowd. Mothers pressed their children close. Fathers nodded, solemn. It was more than an announcement. It was a reckoning. The very man who had once erased Nia's name now stood to restore others. From the corner someone shifted. Amara. No ribbons tied her hair now. No arrogance sharpened her step. She wore a simple dress, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes lowered. She moved forward slowly, her shadow long across the floor. Whispers rippled behind her. Astonishment, disbelief. But she kept walking until she reached the front. She stopped before Nia. The silence tightened, breath held on every side. Amara's voice, when it came, was low, stripped of all pride. "I want to learn." The weight of the words fell heavier than any insult she had ever thrown. Her eyes glistened, not with fury, but with something raw, unguarded. The crowd stared, waiting to see if Nia would turn her away as she once had been. Nia's breath caught. For a moment she saw herself again, small and trembling outside the school gates, the world closing its doors on her. She reached for the memory of Zuberi's hands guiding hers, steadying her, teaching her that even torn fabric could be mended. She stepped forward. In her hand was a pair of scissors, their handles worn smooth from years of use. She placed them into Amara's hands. "Every stitch," she said softly, "is a chance to begin again." The scissors glinted in the light, heavy with more than metal. Amara held them tightly, her shoulders trembling, her lips pressing together as if to hold back tears. The crowd released a collective breath, as though something unseen had finally loosened. Inside the workshop, the hum of machines continued, louder now, steady and unbroken. Girls bent over fabric, their voices rising like bird song. The room smelled of chalk dust and iron, of fabric warmed by the sun, and woven through it all was the ghost of a cough, the echo of a voice whispering not to stop. Nia stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping across the rows of students. For a heartbeat, she imagined Zuberi there, hands folded, eyes watching, lips curved in that quiet smile that had carried her through the darkest nights. The ache in her chest flared, but so did the fire. The village outside was changing, thread by thread, seam by seam. And yet, as she touched the frame of the doorway once more, a question settled in her heart with the weight of destiny. Would the stitches she made hold strong against all the tearing forces still to come, or would they unravel under the strain of a world not yet ready for change? The machines hummed on, carrying the question into the air like a challenge, like a promise. In every life there comes a moment when silence demands an answer, when wounds hidden in the shadows must be acknowledged, and when the smallest fragments are given the chance to be woven into something whole. What may begin as rejection, as loss, or as a thread too thin to matter can, in time, become the very fabric that holds everything together. The truth is that nothing is wasted, not even the broken parts, not even the pieces others cast aside. When gathered with care, stitched with patience, and bound with courage, they form a strength greater than what was ever imagined. We are reminded that dignity is not measured by wealth or appearance, but by the quiet endurance of those who keep moving forward, despite being told to stop. True worth is revealed not in grand gestures, but in the steady work of hands and hearts that choose to rebuild where life has torn apart. Forgiveness, too, is not weakness. It is the choice to offer a second chance, to recognize that everyone carries scraps of regret and longing, and that redemption is found in the willingness to try again. The story lingers as a mirror, urging us to ask what we value most. Do we honor only what looks flawless from the outside, or do we dare to cherish the patchwork, the scars, the resilience stitched into imperfection? Imperfection? Perhaps the greatest legacy is not wealth or status, but the courage to transform pain into promise, to turn absence into presence, to leave behind a pattern of hope for those who come after. As we close this chapter, may its echoes remind us that every ending is also a beginning. What matters is not the applause, nor the fleeting recognition, but the unseen threads we leave behind, the acts of kindness, the choices of courage, the gifts of forgiveness, that continue to bind lives long after we are gone. Thank you for listening to this journey. If it touched your heart, if it stirred a thought, or if it left a trace of hope in you, I invite you to share your reflections below. Your voice matters here. And if you wish to walk with us in more stories like this, don't forget to follow and subscribe so that these threads of humanity continue to be woven together, one story at a time.